Welcome to a special series from the Decarbonisation Dialogue, as we join in celebrating Wales Climate Week. This week, we shine a spotlight on Wales with inspiring conversations featuring artist and maker Bronwen Gwillim, Research Associate Jack Price from the Wales Centre for Public Policy, and Sustainability Manager Teifion Maddocks from Swansea University. We've loved catching up with these remarkable voices to explore their work, their perspectives, and how each of us can play a role in celebrating positive change in the fight against climate change. Tune in to the Decarbonisation Dialogue and discover ideas, inspiration and actionable steps towards a more sustainable future. Croeso I gyfres arbennig gan y Dialog Datcarboneiddio. Rydyn ni fynd I dathlu wythnos Hinsawdd Cymru. Wythnos yma, fe fyddwn ni yn canolbwyntio ac yn dathlu ddatblygiadau Cymru, a sgyrsiau difyr yn cynnwys yr arlunydd Bronwen Gwillim, cydymwaith ymchwil Jack Price o Ganolfan Polisi Gyhoeddus Cymru, a rheolwr cynaliadwyedd Teifion Maddocks o Brifysgol Abertawe. Rydym wedi bod wrth ei bodd yn dal I fyny ar lleisiau anhygoel hyn I archwilio ei gwaith, ei safbwyntiau a sut y gall pob un ohonom chwarae ei rhan mewn creu newid cadarnhaol yn y frwydr yn erbyn newid yn yr hinsawdd. Gwrandewch ar y Dialog Datcarboneiddio a ddarganfyddwch syniadau, ysbrydolaeth a chamau gweithredu tuag at ddyfodol mwy cynaliadwy.
Today I have Bronwen Gwillim with me as a very special guest. Bronwen is an artist, an entrepreneur and environmental advocate who makes a living out of plastic waste and other things I know, which we will talk about. Bronwen has developed a jewellery business making one-off pieces of wearable art jewellery from waste plastic. She collects, reuses and upcycles beach plastic from beaches where she lives on the Pembrokeshire coast in West Wales, all within a mile of her home. These are cut and shaped by hand and combined with industrial waste plastic, recycled silver and resins. Bronwen says she aims to keep her carbon footprint low, using mostly reclaimed materials and hand tools. The very minimum is thrown away. She says it's also a celebration of women and art, as well as our natural world. But her work also offers an insight into the complexities of waste plastic and its impact on marine environments, whilst also highlighting the beauty of the natural world. So Bronwen's materials are both natural and human-made, repurposed cloth, locally foraged earth pigment, homemade plant binders, and the material she most uses, which is obviously the plastic. So Bronwen is here today to talk about her work as a maker, which is fascinating, and we're going to be exploring what that means. So welcome to Bronwen.
Thank you for having me. It's very nice to be here.
Now, Bronwen, tell us a little about your career as an artist and what drew you to become a maker, because I know that you've always, I think, been a maker. And I'd like you to talk us through that career and how you started, because I know you also studied fine art at Goldsmiths and you also went on to Camberwell, and I'd like to talk about how you moved from there to where I think you worked with children in hospitals as well. You've done a huge amount and worked in the community, and you've also worked with refugees. So tell us a little bit about your career and your work as a maker.
I suppose my career has had a definite rhythm, and it's always oscillated between making full-time and being totally immersed in the kind of creative thing, not thinking about anything else really. But also then there's been other times where I've felt like I've needed to connect more. It can be quite a kind of lonely thing working on your own. So then I've kind of spent large amounts of my time, my career, working in hospitals and in schools mostly. And in those settings, I've been using creativity as a kind of tool, really, to empower people. So, for example, in hospitals, I was working with patients and with staff, involving them in designing new buildings, for example, or re-looking at their environment and how having an uplifting environment can make everyone feel better, patients and staff. So I did that. I worked in one hospital for 10 years, found it incredibly rewarding. But what I always tend to do is come back to the making, and that's been a constant. And I think that comes from my family. My dad was a boat builder, an amazing craftsman, And he just had this thing about collecting materials. He wasn't a hoarder because he was very, very selective, and he always knew the value of materials. So our garage was never for putting a car in. It was always for storing amazing materials. Sadly, he died a few months ago, and so it's been fascinating just going through all this stuff that he's collected. But I think that gave me a real fascination and an insight into the value of materials. So my creative work has always been about the materials first. So in these various times where I've immersed myself, hasn't always been the same material. And I've always responded to those things that are at hand. And I think that's kind of a bit like people would have been thousands of years ago. They'd have just used what was available. So when I lived near a very large greenhouse with lots and lots of broken greenhouse glass, very low-grade glass that people would think was rubbish, I worked really hard to develop a line of glassware that used that glass. When I went to Camberwell and studied metalwork and silversmithing, I wasn't interested in using silver. I wanted to use scrap copper and brass. So I think I've always had that thing about, it's not alchemy, but the idea of transforming something that's considered to be low grade to something that's considered high grade. And I suppose that's what led me to jewellery, is it's considered precious. So the idea of what is precious is always in my mind.
And that, just going back to the idea of waste materials and your father collecting items that he thought possibly one day would be of use, presumably. And he was a craftsman, so he would see a material and make something out of it. I think I also heard or read that you also drove a double-decker bus at one point. But it was to do with the arts, wasn't it? It wasn't a double-decker bus, as I know it.
That was a highlight. Yes, when my children were very small, I took a job working on a play bus in Bristol, and it was fantastic because I could strap the children in and drive. We drove this amazing bus, which was a community arts bus, to outlying areas of the city, areas that had very little provision. And women and children would pile onto the bus, and I'd do all sorts of different arts activities. But in the process, it was very much about building community and empowering those women to come together and see how they could support each other, what they might need in their lives, and how to collectively they could kind of work towards getting that. So whether it was they didn't have a local shop, or the local doctor's surgery wasn't good enough or meeting their needs, or there wasn't enough childcare around, it was around community development, really.
So you talk about using. We've moving on from the bus, but you've talked about reusing that material. How do you think, we want to talk about climate change and climate action. How does your work, do you think, reflect your environmental values or your concerns for climate change? How do you think that reusing, I know you did some research or some work with Bristol companies when you were living in Bristol, because you were collecting. You were knocking on doors, weren't you, I think, and asking them if they had any waste. And I think you said at some point that there was a variety of a response. Some people kind of had a plan for their waste, others didn't. How does your work, do you think, reflect your concern? I mean, you live in one of the most beautiful places in the world, don't you?
Well, it is beautiful, but it's also, I also live opposite an oil refinery. So I'm constantly reminded about the fossil fuel industry, really. I suppose my thing is about not producing any waste. I suppose my biggest question is, in a world that's so full of stuff, in a world that consumes so much, far too much, we consume too much, how can I justify creating more things for people to consume? And I think that's so completely linked to climate change, this overconsumption and overproduction. So I need to make sure that I am actually reusing something that's already there, that's problematic even. So using beach plastic for me, or whether it was waste, whether it was glass, anything that was going to be going into landfill or causing a problem down the line, I think is much better than using virgin materials. So that's the main thing, really. But then I have to think not just about where the materials have come from, I have to think what will happen to what I've made afterwards as well. So it's that whole kind of life cycle thing. I mean, one of the advantages of jewellery is quite small. So I'm using very small amounts of material, often things that can't be used for anything else. They're such tiny bits, and that's certainly an issue with beach plastic, where the microplastics and then they become nanoplastics, everything's getting smaller and smaller. So jewellery's quite good for that. But also I think there's a thing about jewellery being precious. And you may not like a piece of jewellery, but you'd find it much harder to put it in the bin than you would a bit of plastic food wrapping. Our associations around value and what's precious, I think, are different around things like jewellery. But also I had a kind of personal experience with jewellery where I think, I say that I want to kind of celebrate women. I had a time when I was very low. I'd had breast cancer, and after that experience, I really wanted to wear something very bright. And so making a piece of jewellery that was very bright, bold, but also was environmentally sensitive made me feel better about myself, but also that I was saying something positive about my values and the environment too. I have a small waste bin in my studio, and I have a thing that every time I put something in the bin, really questioning whether that's the right thing to do and how can I get that work that out of my production process. So I mostly cut plastic. I do some gentle melting, but I try to use a process that used very little electricity. Partly that comes from my first studio was on a canal boat, and the batteries were terrible, but also it's about having a low carbon footprint too. So I cut plastic by hand using jewellery tools and techniques, and that creates dust. And this dust does worry me. It's tiny particles, it's not good. So I do have a very good extraction system, and then I collect the dust, and then I mix that with different binders. Increasingly, they're plant-based binders or eco-binders that have a lower amount of fossil-based components within them. And that creates a new composite material, and that material is also included in the jewellery. So I'm actually recycling my waste as well into the process. And what's great about that material is everyone thinks it looks like stone. So I'm quite interested in how people are confused by materials. Plastic's very good at confusing people. Often you can think, well, that can't be plastic, it's heat-proof, or that can't be plastic, it's so strong. But it's an extraordinary material that I love and hate.
Let's talk about Wales for a moment. You have a huge, you have this Welsh heritage. I think your grandfather was Welsh. I think your father, I think most of your family now obviously live in Wales, and you yourself live on the Angle Peninsula. And as you say, you've got the tankers on the one side, and then the other side, you've got the Atlantic, and you've got the beaches, and you've got this plastic and waste washing up on the shore. Now, you've talked about plastic because, of course, plastic doesn't always look exactly like plastic when it's washed up on the shore. Not the plastic that we think about when we go into the shops anyway. What other kind of materials do you find on that shore that are of use or inspiration? As I've looked at your work, and you do look at the colours of boats and you bring that into your jewellery, which is just so beautiful. They're not always bright. You'll correct me if I'm wrong. Your jewellery isn't always bright colours. Some of it's really beautifully subdued. But tell me about that process of going onto the beach, because I certainly know with my children, we've spent a lot of time on various beaches collecting buoys, collecting rope, collecting a bit of plastic clay on the Thames. For years, we've always collected those clay pipes that would be thrown in, doing all that. And we still do, actually. Tell me about your process for collecting. Are you seen in your big Wellington boots on the beach collecting with a big bag?
I have a terrible reputation locally because people say, I can always be seen either in the mud on East Angle Bay or on the more windswept sandy beach on the other side. What's incredible, I think, about living here is how affected you are by the rhythms of nature.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the tides. I live in a house that gets cut off when there's a very high spring tide. But those very high spring tides are also really exciting times because it means you can walk out onto the mud, and I can walk right across the bay, an area that's normally completely covered by water. And that reveals the most incredible underwater worlds, these creatures that, you know, they don't like being exposed, especially in the middle of the day to sun. But for me, it's a delight to see these things. So it's a funny mixture of fantastical creatures as well as historical things. There's clay pipes. It's an ancient medieval village. So there's all those kinds of historical things. And then juxtaposed with that, there's incredible amounts of waste from the fishing industry. So I'll come back and my pocket will be full of this weird mixture of things, a nice bit of seaweed, a funny bit of plastic, an old clay pipe, and a beautiful shell. So I think that is definitely an inspiration. And my artworks that I'm making now are much more about that, how we're living in this kind of strange transition time where we're still totally reliant on plastic, but we're also very interested in more natural things. And so my artworks are about that awkward juxtaposition, this awkward time we're in, and how it's all mixed up and jumbled. So they combine natural materials that are around me, beautiful coloured clays that I make into paint, and then there's a piece of plastic stuck in there, and it's that awkwardness that I'm interested in, and how we're very good at kind of just pretending that one bit of it doesn't exist. So the plastic is kind of bright and popping out of these beautiful muted natural colours, which are very wholesome and appealing. But it's a reminder, like the oil refinery across the way.
Like what you see, yeah, exactly. The oil refinery, you've got the rural, the mix. It's never not there. What difference have you noticed in your kind of beaching, foraging, whatever you call it? What difference have you noticed about what is happening on our shores, particularly the Pembrokeshire beaches and marine environment over the years?
It's very interesting, actually, because what comes up is so dictated by the geography of the coastline. So the nearest beach to me, which collects a huge amount of plastic, is orientated that it catches nearly a huge amount, whereas the beach just around the corner will get nothing. So it's all about the tide, the wind direction, and so it can change really, really from week to week. I can remember going down one day and it would all be just domestic waste, plastic bottle tops from drinks bottles. I collected about 100 in about half an hour. The next week, nothing like that. It would just be all fishing stuff. So it's really hard for me to kind of map any particular pattern. I just get the sense that it's in the ocean. It's floating. Mostly beach plastic is plastic that floats. So we don't even see all the nylon stuff, which is at the bottom of the ocean and actually causing much more problems. The plastic I see is the stuff that's, bobbing around on the top and gets tossed onto the beach, particularly when there's a storm. So the sea does this incredible sorting process. So it's very hard to know what's really going on. In a way, I'm quite pleased when the beach is covered with plastic because it means it's not in the ocean, and there's a way of at least kind of seeing what's going on. What's much more scary is thinking about all the stuff that's out there that is actually directly affecting marine life. So yeah, I'm not answering the question very well because it's very hard, I think, because it's so changeable from week to week.
Yes. Now, you've talked a little bit about your studio practices and trying to make sure everything that you're using is sustainable. It's not just that you're using and repurposing the materials that you're sourcing, but your actual practices, because everything has got to come together. How hard is that? How hard is it to maintain a sustainable studio? Because we hear a lot about how expensive or how costly being sustainable can be. And if we want to go into kind of reach our kind of net zero targets, if you like, and Wales has got challenging net zero targets around how we heat our homes, how we transport ourselves, etc. How hard is it for you in your life to maintain a sustainable studio?
I think I've changed my whole business model to be more sustainable, and that is about being much more effective, using my time and my materials more effectively. So selling directly is much more efficient for me. Unfortunately, that means I'm not supporting many of the kind of galleries and shops that need support. But for me, that doesn't work, because I need to make sure that I'm maximising the profit that I have on the items that I sell. Especially because they need to be one-offs, really. I can't scale up, because I can't predict the materials I have. You know, a supplier can't ring me and say, I'll have 50 of those in that colour. It just doesn't work like that. So for me, I really rely on having collectors who love my work, having a faithful following, selling directly as much as possible, reducing my own expectations of lifestyle as well. I don't fly, so I spent a lot of time. I'm so lucky. I know other people can't do this. I mean, I haven't always lived like this, but at the moment we grow all our own vegetables, and I live very, very simply. So that's how it works.
And how do you see your work evolving over the next few years, both environmentally and creatively? I know that you do workshops. I think you do courses. I don't know if you're developing those, you've got future plans for those. How do you see continuing online, or where are you going next?
I think my next thing is definitely doing more work with schools. I'm working with a number of schools in Wales. There's some fantastic projects going around with schools, and I think young people's awareness is really growing, and due to some brilliant initiatives. So yes, working with schools and educating young people. I think I'd love people to be more literate about what they're buying and the materials and the production processes in them. So teaching much more is important, and working more with young people is important to me. I also want to work more with other artists. I'm part of a new group in Wales called Caer Cilch, Closing the Circle, which is, and we're a group of artists who are all interested in sustainability. So we put on exhibitions, we run residencies, and so, through those kinds of events, creating much more of a network. So we're not so isolated, and we can kind of wave the flag much more prominently. So I think community and reaching out, and teaching is great for that. Teaching is really great for that. People don't even look at the bottom of a piece of plastic and see that it's actually got a little code on it which will tell you what it is. And so just getting people into playing the game of, do I know what kind of plastic this is? Do I know what it's used for? Do I know how likely it is to be recycled or not? It can be quite fun, and it makes such a difference, I think.
I love hearing about your work in the community, because that's something that that has been fluid, hasn't it, throughout your career?
Absolutely.
Stepping back and working with the community, and perhaps putting your other work on hold, but it sounds like you're going to go forward with more of a balance between, being able to create your own work in your studio and combining that with your work in the community. Absolutely superb, and it's wonderful to get some kind of an idea of how you're working, and of course you're working in, as I say, an incredibly beautiful part of Wales, and the studio practices. I'm hoping that we'd like to see more of that in video as well, or at least sharing more of that, and how you can create that sustainable life and work place, which you're obviously doing. Thank you very much for your time today. Thank you so much for Bronwen for providing such insight. There can be no doubt that climate change is the biggest challenge of our time. Today, we must reduce greenhouse gas emissions to slow global warming. Today, we must act for tomorrow, adjusting our lifestyles to current and future impacts of climate change. Today we must use our collective wisdom to deliver on our climate commitments. Today we work for tomorrow's world. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast channels and please email us with your news and views at podcast@salixfinance.co.uk. A big thank you to Bronwen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hannah.
Thank you for listening to our special edition of the Decarbonisation Dialogue, celebrating Wales Climate Week. Diolch o galon am wrando i un gyfres arbennig o'r Deialog Datgarboneiddio yn dathlu wythnos Hinsawdd Cymru.
For more information about our work and to find more content, please visit salixfinance.co.uk/podcasts.